has reported this week that the Conservative Party chairman avoided tax and now has to pay it back, paying a multi-million-pound penalty. If he really did avoid tax, should he resign?
I think it's very, very difficult to justify a man who, it appears, at the time he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, was either being investigated for this or found to be been responsible for misleading the HMRC on his taxes. It's very hard to see in those circumstances how he can cling on to office and justify it. This is what the public hates more than anything. Politicians telling you to play by the rules and then playing by different rules. Now, with one caveat, let him come clean with 100% of the truth about the series of events, the chronology of events, and what he's been found guilty of doing. And then let us judge, okay? But if he's not willing to do that, which so far he hasn't been willing to do, then my inclination would be to say that if the HMRC decided he had to pay a substantive amount of money back,
multi-million-pounds,
they can only believe that he gave them inappropriate information and or misled them. Depends how you want to look at it. So until I hear otherwise, my inclination would be to say that he should do the right thing and resign from his position in the government.
Do you think he should resign? Oh, he should resign.
He should resign. Yeah. Unless he can put into the public domain information which changes my mind and changes the mind of the average fair-minded person. I'm not talking about tribal politics. I'm not talking about Labour versus Conservative. The average fair-minded person hates politicians saying one thing to them and then doing the opposite. If he can demonstrate, okay, that this wasn't the case, then even I would be willing to reconsider what I've just said to you about his resignation. But because at the moment he's refusing to put the full facts into public domain in terms of the chronology of events, as well as the chronology of events, then one can only assume that he doesn't have a very strong case. So my inclination, I'm afraid, at the moment would be to say he should resign. I would be more than willing to reconsider that if he put everything in the public domain and it turned out that I was being unfair.
Russell, what do you think?
Well, I think he said today that the HMRC said it was careless. I think those are the words that he's used. That what I find quite bewildering in these situations is that somebody who quite clearly has got some significant HMRC returns to make by virtue of what he's been doing. One would assume that he would have had a half-decent accountant doing such returns. I can't believe, I can't believe the standard of advice that some of our senior politicians actually get these days, because it's just utterly bewildering, isn't it? And that's not getting Nadhim. No. I'm not letting him off because ultimately he'll have to sign his form off. And it's it for me demonstrates, I think, something that at this moment in time that the challenge. You talk about the first question of engaging young people into politics. I'm not so sure that stuff like with Nadhim Zahawi, as with Rishi and the seatbelt, those are the sort of things that people actually look at and just scratch their head about.
I think there's a real problem for the Conservative Party because it's the accumulation of events. It's not by the way, not the seatbelt. We can all make a mistake like that, okay?
And my points advisors.
Yeah, no.
You'd be saying.
Well, nobody should be sat in the car advising you to put a seatbelt on. I mean, even you and I could work that one out without having an advisor. So come on. So what I would say is, I actually don't think that the Prime Minister should be seriously asked to resign because he failed to put. Equally, we got to send out a clear message that it's very dangerous not wearing a seatbelt. There's horrendous, horrific tragedies, whether it's in the back or the front. Yeah, and we've all done it from time to time. Okay, and therefore, once found out, he had to pay a fine. Okay, end of, move on. Most members of the public do not want to see that linger. However, when you're talking about somebody who is extremely intelligent, very able, somebody I've got a lot of time for actually, who clearly has not paid the correct taxation, and it seems to me either careless or misleading or whatever words you want to use. Okay, and you see, Russell's makes a very interesting point. His advisor might have said to him, well, you know what? This is lawful, right? But I'm not sure, okay? I think when you're a politician, you have to look at whether something is ethical as well as it's lawful. Yeah. If you're going to hold one of the big offices of state, and I say the problem for the Conservative Party is not these one-off incidents. It's the accumulation of these issues day after day after day. This is debilitating the Conservative government. It's one of the primary reasons they're so far behind in the polls, by the way. Obviously, the economy hasn't helped. What Liz Truss did in terms of tanking the economy didn't help them because that was an own goal. Whereas people accepted before that the Ukraine and COVID were not the government's fault, actually. But when Liz Truss did what she did, it did a lot of damage. But in addition to that, you've got one story after another about this sense of they believe it's okay for them to behave in a particular way while they're asking us to behave in a different way. It's arrogant, it's contemptuous of ordinary people, and that does massively damage a government when it's one thing after another, day after day. And Rishi Sunak must be totally aware of this.
Yeah, Russell, specifically about the Conservative Party chairman, do you think he should resign if it was that he did actually...
as I say, if HMRC are saying it was careless, I think that word says it, doesn't it? So for me, careless isn't a resigning issue. It's a word though that you would want not to have round your neck as you move forward, though, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Can I just come in with that? I agree with Russell about the careless and it not necessarily resigning matter, but I just want to say a couple of things. People like that, and I've met Nadhim Zahawi, I've got a selfie with him on my phone, and he is a very, very impressive.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Cable, no question about that whatsoever. But a lot of these people, the tax people recently stopped sending me tax forms because I had a little bit of self-employed income, but it wasn't enough to make them bother with a tax return for me. My other jobs that I've got, including being a counsellor, you pay PAYE. So I'm not a great expert on filling in tax forms. What I do know, people of that ilk, they rely heavily on their advisors. They don't have a lot of time in the day. They employ these advisors at great cost, and they more or less leave it to them. Now, I know that they're ultimately responsible. Of course they are. At the end of the day, they're the ones that sign the form. As I remember when I did used to fill in tax returns. But in practice, they often leave it to their advisors. Now, let me say this. Yes, it could be careless. If it was really serious, and the HMRC regarded it, for example, as fraudulent, as illegal, he would be in serious criminal trouble. Like, for example, the late Sylvester Piggott, the great champion jockey, won the Derby several times. He went to prison for tax evasion. And by the way, years ago, there used to be a difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance.
Still is, I think.
There still is legally, definitely, yeah. Some say ethically there isn't. So I think, let's put it that way. If he gets prosecuted and certainly found guilty of fraud or misleading the HMRC, by all means, he's got to go. But if he isn't and they don't feel it...
Well, it's ended. It's the HMRC, as far as they're concerned, as I understand, there's a matter closed.
Because he's a senior politician, do you not think he should be required to put into the public domain all of the facts in terms of what actually happened? Do you not believe that? So the public has a right to make a judgment. I've said to you, I'd be willing to reconsider what I said about resignation. Surely he has a duty to do that. Come on, of course he does.
There is always a fine line with that, isn't there, Ivan? And I think that's a personal call. Yeah. But on a personal basis, if that was me, I would. In fact, because
if you genuinely believe it's purely being careless,
because I think there is a need for, and you hinted upon it yourself. Personally, I believe as a politician, you should be totally and absolutely transparent in everything you do. So people can actually see, we declare all our interests, and tax affairs are of interest to people. For the obvious reasons, you're in the public eye, aren't you? Yeah. So from that point,
and people are having it tough at the moment as well. That's the other reason.
So on a personal basis, I would have no problem if I was fortunate to have to pay the level of tax that he was. That'd be more than.
You want to know where you got the money from in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. But it is a personal choice, that isn't it?
Can I just as Russell said, we as politicians have to make a lot of declarations. We have to declare, for example, as councillors, what property we own within the council area, what contracts we've got. But we do not have to disclose our income, we do not have to disclose our tax. Now, supposing my tax affairs, were joint with my wife, were joint with my son, were joint with Chaim Yankel, why should they have to have their tax affairs brought into the public domain? Because
there's no mention of Chaim Yankel or Mrs. Zahawi. No mention of either.
Okay, but I think you get the point. And
Do you not think specifically what Ivan said, that if there's nothing dodgy, then there shouldn't be?
Yeah.
But it's not as simple as that. As I've said, there could be other legitimate reasons why he doesn't want to put it in the public domain, because he might be putting other people's privacy.
The press aren't going to lay off him, I'll tell you. The press are not going to lay off him.
Well, not lay off
They'll
him.
go on day after day after day. And Rishi
Yeah.
Sunak will be put in a very invidious position as long as this goes on.
I accept that.
And all I'm saying to you, as somebody who has a little bit of respect for this particular politician, right, who would want to be fair-minded, okay, I would say, I think that based on the evidence we've got, he should resign. If he were willing to put all of this information in the public domain, I would be willing to change my mind. If I was persuaded that he'd not misled, that he'd been most unfortunate, then I would be willing to reconsider that.
As I said, that isn't so simple. Can I just end with, having introduced a note of discord earlier, can I just say a little joke that I heard? I'm a bit of a fan of Ken Dodd, who's way before your time, but Russell and Ivan will know exactly who he was. He was a comedian, and he got prosecuted for tax. Remember?
So did Jimmy Carr.
Pardon?
He blamed the Diddy, mate.
He blamed the Diddy, yeah. But he got off. He got off. I once went to see him in a show many, many years ago.
And he joked about it, I think.
And he joked about it.
Yeah.
And he said, I always remember this, he said, the HMRC, well, I don't think they were even called the HMRC, the tax office, whatever, owe me great thanks, he said. I invented self-assessment.
You see, he can get away with it because he's a comedian.
Yeah. Well, his whole...
He's not one of our leaders, though.
His whole excuse, and I remember this very well, was he knows nothing about tax, nothing about finance, and he left it all to his accountant.
I mean, the other question that's interesting is if it was, as has been suggested, quite possible that you leave this to your advisor, right? And the consequence of leaving this to your advisor is this is what's happened. We want to know, has he sacked his advisor? Has he terminated his contract? Has he said, you're never going to work for me on tax matters again? We want to know that one. Because if Russell's right, then that's what needs to happen.
That's what he said now. That's what
Sure, yeah.
So if it is his advisor's fault, do you think his advisor should go?
Well,
it's a tax advisor. It's not a political advisor. So he wouldn't have to go. But I mean, I want to know why he hasn't got rid of him. Yeah. Okay, but I'm not sure. Let's be honest. There is a thin line between evasion and avoidance, right? And you sit with, they sit together and they say, "Can we get away with that? Can we get away with that? Is that lawful? Is that ethical?" I bet you, is it ethical? Is not often answered in these private rooms sometimes. Okay.
Yeah.
When you are a senior politician holding a position of responsibility, particularly if you end up Chancellor of the Exchequer, he probably didn't know, by the way, he would end up Chancellor of the Exchequer. Probably the further thing from his mind. Yeah. But I'm afraid to say you have an added set of responsibilities. You just do, because the public expects that from people in positions of power. And look, sometimes, like the seatbelt, honestly, it's ridiculous to call on Rishi Sunak to so I'm being, I'm not being political. Ridiculous to call him to resign for not putting his seatbelt on. Okay, but obviously he was found out. There was a consequence. You've got to send a message. I get that. So he had to be fined. All right, okay, all right. But no way would I say he should resign. Yeah. That would be ludicrous. This is a completely different scale of accusation, far more serious, far more substantive, and far more to the heart of this question. While I'm having it tough as an ordinary member of the public and working really hard to make ends meet and to even survive, look at these people at the top and the way they're behaving. It leaves people with a very, very bad taste in their mouth. And that is the problem for the Conservative Party at the moment. It could have been other political parties in the past, not just... But at the moment, it's one accident after another for the government, and this has a cumulative impact on their reputation.
It does, and it also shows the press, doesn't it? Because suddenly coming out of the woodwork are all the pictures of Keir sat in the back of the car without a seatbelt a couple of years ago, which obviously were around and not being published. There is a media agenda, isn't there, against the Conservative Party? But let's be perfectly honest, the Conservative Party are giving them the material.
I think it's pretty staggering to accuse the British media of being anti-Conservative Party. I've never heard a Tory with a straight face, frankly, say that. Really? For years and years and years, they've had the support of the mainstream press in the country. You know that, Russell.
Well, maybe historically, but I'm not so sure at the moment. But equally, we are giving them too much to be able
maybe
to...
the press, but not the media.
Too much to print, and there is too many own goals. And and already this year has started off. We hoped that was going to change. We thought that would be one of the fundamental changes with Rishi, that we would get back to being boring.
You see, the other thing here is that he appointed Nadhim Zahawi in the knowledge that this matter was hanging over him. We've got to remember that Rishi Sunak knew about this. He was warned about it. Yeah, at the point so the other question I've got is, what basis did he choose to ignore those warnings or to disregard those warnings? And that also is very, very strange almost, and unclear. He appointed, we all know he appointed our favourite person, I think Russell's favourite person, Sir Gavin Williamson, who was another accident waiting to happen because he'd politically been useful to him. So the other question that people will ask is about the judgment of the Prime Minister. They won't just ask about the behaviour of the individuals. They'll say, in the knowledge, in the full knowledge of these facts, why did the Prime Minister put the reputation of the government and Conservative Party at risk by appointing him to a big job? Why didn't you wait till that investigation by HMRC was concluded? Yeah? You would know the result, and then you can make an informed decision.
Well, I think I slightly disagree with Aaron on this, because my understanding was the matter was closed by the HMRC and has been closed because he's allegedly paid whatever was needed.
I think it was closed after he'd been appointed by Rishi Sunak to his current job, though. That's the whole point.
So the satisfaction of the HMRC, what I think is the mistake that's made in these sorts of situations is that the story gets ultimately leaked, doesn't it, via the media. You are far better being totally and absolutely proactive and you coming clean at the very start of the situation. That's the position of strength. That, ultimately these things do come out. You'd be in a far stronger position at whatever point it was for him to have said, actually, official release, this is a statement of fact, then that kills the story. And again, I don't think that government are blessed with too many experts on the communications.
It's a new job for you as a political advisor.
Well, it's communications, isn't it? You kill the story.
But I think, people, obviously, he's always worried about his family and the effect, so he would hope that it wouldn't get out. I mean, the obvious reality, he would hope that it wouldn't get out. And it did get out. The point I was making in terms of Russell was purely that Rishi Sunak appointed him while this investigation was ongoing. It wasn't closed. And that, for me, is a pretty serious decision. It would have made more sense to have said, look, while the investigation is ongoing, please stay outside of the government. You understand why. As soon as it's concluded, if it's concluded satisfactorily, you'll get a big job in my government because you're a very able person. That puzzles me as to why that wasn't his Sunak's decision, and that is what again will damage him. The sense of judgment, the leaders making judgments that are wrong or dubious, or add to the same perception.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Can I just end by declaring an interest here, and not.
You know the accountant.
No, I don't know.
He is the accountant.
Unfortunately, not that I've got a share in.
You weren't the accountant, were you? No.
The interest I want to declare is that when I was filling in tax forms years ago, your granddad was my accountant.
Brilliant. Well. Anyway, thanks so much for coming on, everyone, and.
Thank you, Ellie.
See you next week, probably.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Russell and Rabbi Saunders. Thank you.